I'm going to read a story by Abby Poyen Whittier. This is the wife of Mathew Franklin Whittier, who was myself in the 19th century. This story was published in the Boston Weekly Museum in the October 26th, 1850 edition. And this is called The Sister Mary. Now, I'm going to give most of the background for this in the comments, as well as the relevance to my research about A Christmas Carol, because I believe that Mathew and Abby were the original authors of A Christmas Carol, and that Abby wrote all of the scenes and the dialogue concerning the spirits, which she believed to be real, okay? So you'll see similarities in the language, but all the parallels I'll put in the comments. The only thing I'll mention here is that a lot of Abby's stories were based on her clients. She was essentially a social worker, a charity worker, and she worked apparently with Irish immigrants. And so she would write stories, of course, without identifying them, but she would write stories about her clients. And that's what this is. This apparently is a story about a little boy who had been injured when he was a baby and had a spine injury, but then the sister, one of his sisters, older sister, worked to save up enough money to send him for a cure, see? Well, I think behind this story is that Abby, or whoever she was working for, also contributed money for this cure, but of course they didn't want to say that they had done that. So that's the background of this story as I believe. Now, the type is really small, so I'm going to have to bend over and kind of scrutinize it, and I may stumble a little bit trying to figure out words. I've got my overhead light on so you can see my bald head shining, but that's the reason is so that I can read this type. So we're going to get started. The Sister Mary by the author of Mary Mahoney. Now, the very first story that Mathew published posthumously for Abby, she died in 1841, was Mary Mahoney, one of her early stories about an Irish orphan, one of her clients, apparently. And that's the only one that was signed with her initials AP. All the rest of them were signed by the author of Mary Mahoney, but it indicates AP, which is Abby Poyen. Chapter 1. Nobody could have believed, to have peeped into the McFarland rooms, that ever beauty or comfort got in there. Bits of dingy things at the very top of the tall block of stores with only one window between them. But then that window looked out on a great thoroughfare, and, high up as it was, the sunshine looked into it all the afternoon long, stretching farther and farther upon the floor, till it stood up all bright like a good angel against the far side of the room, reminding them always, as they used to say, there was not a spot in the great universe so hidden, but God's love would find it out. It was really a bright home, too, for Mary McFarland, if she was a widow, had a way of making everything cheery and pleasant where she was, and the sight of her homely, kind face in there was quite as good in its way as the sunlight was. But if one looked in, he would have found something beyond all this to give the small household an interest. Close by the window, on a soft little cot, nicely spread and so arranged that he could watch the passers-by and still rest and observe all indoors, lay propped up on his pillows a pale, helpless boy. This was the great focus of all their thoughts. The little Albert, now more than 12 years old, who had been suffering almost from his infancy from a hurt spine. It was only a slight injury at first, occasioned by a fall, and quite unregarded. But it had been gradually getting worse and worse, and the child had been almost imperceptibly failing, until now he had become utterly powerless to raise himself, and lay there day after day, with his sweet face looking out that window like a caged bird in the house. But he was just the connecting link betwixt the rest and heaven. For him, Mary McFarland, the elder sister, had been out toiling for years, not at general work, embroidery or the like. No, they were poor people, and had been poor all their lives, And Mary had no skill in these things, nor had she great friends either to help her into high employ, such as her education might have made her equal to, or time to give away for getting herself a trade. Mary was a kitchen girl. She was not ashamed of it, and I am nowise ashamed to tell of it, for there was that in her character that made the coarseness of her hands look like a badge of nobility, as it always should, and Mary knew how to dignify her employment, and never sat still waiting for such employment as might dignify her. It was good to see her come in now of the Sunday afternoon, with her kind face lit up, as it always was, by her own conscious independence and true worth. Mary never was a menial, somehow, perhaps, because she never thought of such a thing herself. Nobody ever looked down on her. She had listened to the conversation of intelligent people, and, in her evenings away in her own small room, she had read many an instructive book. And she came home, not as though bent with the yoke of servitude, but womanly and beautiful in everything she said and did. Katie, the other sister, had a far softer path. She only tended in a little store, with income scarcely sufficient for her own wants, and she boarded at home. But it was the same with Katie as with Mary, no matter how coarse their own gowns were, so that the darling little Allie was surrounded with everything bright and comfortable. There he lay that Sunday afternoon, very patient and smiling as usual, and there, just within his reach, was a little shelf of books Mary had bought for him, and the pots of flowers on the window seat, and the canary and the musical flute. But now, better than them all, Mary herself was there, and to be sure, such an atmosphere of health and freshness went about with her. The very sight of her, as she looked in at the door, drove his ailings far away. Some unusual light there was in Mary's face, too, just now, that drew attention from all. "Ah, Mary, and it's you," said the mother, looking up to her with a face full of inquiry. Katie put away her sister's bonnet and shawl, and gave her her own seat where she had been sitting by the brother's cot, singing to the flute, all the while looking very happy and wise herself. And Albert, who had put his hand out instinctively, ashamed to say it, patient, uncomplaining little being as they said he was, Allie had put his hand out for an expected present, for something always come with Mary, and he could never help mixing up the thought of it with the anticipation of her coming for the life of him. But no, Mary's hands were empty, though there was the same mysterious sunshine undiminished, as she returned all their greetings, and then took the vacant chair, and lifted the boy into her strong arms. Albert was a stinted creature, and Mary scarce minded him more than a feather's weight. And now, "Ah, Allie, I've good news for you." I'm struck by this line. My gosh, this is a parallel to A Christmas Carol. Did you notice this? I had never seen this before. But no, Mary's hands were empty, though there was the same mysterious sunshine undiminished, as she returned all their greetings, and then took the vacant chair and lifted the boy into her strong arms. Albert was a stinted creature, and Mary scarce minded him more than a feather's weight. I'll let you look up the corresponding section in A Christmas Carol. And now, "Ah, Allie, I've got good news for you," was the first breaking out of the happy secret that had seemed, from the first fretting, to get utterance. "We must have you get well, Allie." "Well, well, well," was echoed all around, little Albert giving a delirious start, and the mother and sister glancing at one another as though in doubt of poor Mary's sanity. "Yes, well, Allie, darling. Are the clothes all done, mother? I brought home for you to make?" "Yes, Mary. But, Mary, what do you mean?" "And your own cap and gown, mother?" "Yes, Mary." "And the blankets and nice napkins, mother?" "Yes." That also is relevant to A Christmas Carol. The face of Mary, the daughter, looked as though the spirit underneath it was singing for very joy. But Mary, the widow's, was anxious and bewildered beyond expression, and after a little silence she broke out, that surely 'twas very strange to her, with all Mary's prudence, she'd be buying so many needless things. For her part, she'd be content with just nothing at all, rather than take from Mary's hard earnings. And as for Allie, though heaven help the patient thing, it was good to see comforts about him. But 'twas little he wanted there in his helplessness. And as for his getting well, she continued, Mary, isn't it wrong to set the child hoping when you know there's only disappointment waiting before him? Then Mary's story all came out. No, mother, no, Allie, darling. It isn't that I would disappoint you or bring one pang to you for the great whole world, but there is help for Allie. And here Mary, very simply and concisely, and intermixing her history with many an endearing epithet on the little burden in her arms, told how she had been saving up money for months and months to have Allie sent to the great water care establishment they had all heard so much about, how she had written, describing his case to the attendant physicians exactly as it was, for she had heard how eminently successful their treatment had been in cases of the kind, as who has not, and how there had come almost a warrant for his getting well back to her, how she had gone on in her work silently, for she feared something might happen to thwart all, and finally, how now the money was in her hand, the garments were all ready, and there was nothing to hinder his setting out, the mother, to be sure, with him, the very next day. Oh, to tell what joy there was in that little room now would be beyond the power of words. And what a very minister of good Mary looked as she sat there with her broad shoulders and rough hands. Nobody for a moment thought of questioning the infallibility of Mary's conclusions. Something in her quiet, clear-judging way of viewing things drew every mind into its own current, and it seemed impossible, when one looked at Mary, that any scheme could fail in which her hopes had been embarked. Nobody said, either, keep the money yourself, Mary, it's your own earnings, and lay it by for the time of need, for there was that in the healthy brightness of her face and her pleasant speech that proclaimed Mary only the richer for the action, and that 'twas brave usury coming back to her already. And for her own future, Mary's honest trust in God put anxiety far away. Chapter 2. Great was the commotion inside of those 2 small rooms that night. It was said the widow never slept at all, but was moving about hither and thither, unknowing whether she was in a tumult most of hope or fear. Mary and Katie were up and doing hours before light, and little Allie dreamed of driving his hoop through every lane and by-street within sight, of running races with the boys, and finally of walking to church with his sister Mary and hearing the minister call her angel. It was little he slept, though, for his thin little hand was continually putting away the curtain to make sure that the sky was clear. But the stars kept on shining bright, almost as his own hopes, and the morning broke at last, clear and beautiful as the morning ever is. Huzzah, that morning, to see the smart hack at the door, the baggage all on, and the widow in Mary's straw bonnet and plaited shawl, looking like a real lady, as she really was, sitting inside, and little Allie brought down in Mary's arms, so nicely arrayed, and looking so beautiful, with his sparkling brown eyes and broad white forehead, and Katie following with the bird cage, for the canary was to go for company. Had anyone peeped at the McFarland group then, he would have known there had been both comfort and beauty there, whatever he might have thought. Away whirled the coach. The sick boy waved his hand feebly from the window, which signal Mary answered, and then Mary put the rooms in order, and then she arranged with an acquaintance for Katie's board in the meantime, and then, with a heart lighter than ever, went back again to her old toils, not like the discontented pendulum, or any other discontented worker, repining that her lot was hard, or that she had no time to indulge a thought of the absent ones. No, she thanked God that she had strength and will for honest labor and for thought. Could not her thoughts flit on just as easily while she went to and fro, as though she had sat herself down in state to give them audience? Indeed, nobody who has leisure for that ever realized in it all one iota more of poetry and beauty or of elevated sentiment than flowed along the current of Mary's thoughts that day. On went the days. They never lag when one has enough to do. Away, away, bringing at the appointed time a letter, and such a letter, but little about himself or his ailings, but what a thing it was to be abroad in the great world. And there he had found out something, the, quote, heartless world, the, quote, cold, unfeeling world, quote, the deceitful world. That was all cant. He had met more genuine kindness and sympathy than anything else. The next letter, he almost thought he was stronger. The next, he was sure of it. And in the next, as though God's own blessing was upon Mary's hopes, there came assurance from the physicians that he was actually recovering. And now the autumn days fled by, and letters came, always bringing cheering news. The nights lengthened. September, October, November had gone by. And now, just on the verge of the old Thanksgiving Day, the rooms were all alight again. There was the curtain put away, and the firelight on the window, and there, the wheels upon the pavement, and a hackney coach dashing up to the same door, and there, returned, was Albert and the mother. Mary and Katie both standing by, and Allie stepped out alone. His feet were actually on the pavement. He walked up the stairs. He ran. He jumped. He capered about. The room was not half large enough for him. Allie was well, restored. If it was a miracle, it was no less a truth. There was the dream of years fulfilled, though even Mary could not bring herself to realize it. Years have gone by since then, and Mary still toils and sings and comes home to the little rooms of the Sunday afternoons. The uninterrupted seclusion of his childhood has given Albert a singular habit of thought and study, and now, instead of the invalid's couch by the window, more beautiful 1,000 times is the strong, untiring student and his books. A student, too, is he of uncommon promise, but destitute of means as he is, and dearly as she dotes on him, Mary no longer aids him with her earnings, for she knows that he can succeed unassisted, and she knows, too, that a kind of education must be purchased by the effort that will be to him in afterlife better than all money could buy.